Are you considering renting out larger tents? Here are some things that might be helpful for the booking process. The first thing I'd like to do is determine the size of tent that the client is looking for. I usually ask the question, how many people do you want to fit underneath the tent? Then, usually with the quote, I present the client with some pictures, some videos, and some CAD layout drawings of tents that might work for their event. What really helps in this case is getting as much information as possible for the client to determine kind of what they're looking for. Do they want a dance floor? Do they want peripherals? But once I send out all those resources, all those pictures, videos, and CAD drawings, usually they end up choosing a tent size that will suit them the best. Around this time, as the client's providing me with information, I also decide whether I want to work with the client at all. Usually for bigger tents, they're going to want them for busy summer weekends, and you're probably already having a few leads for those summer weekends. And because these are your largest tents, you might only have a couple of them. And so you really want to decide, do I want to work with this client? If there's any red flags, if they're overly demanding, or perhaps if your tent or materials or time frame or schedule really doesn't match with what the client needs, perhaps the best thing to do is to just say, you know what, we're booked right now, or whatever the case may be, and just choose a different client to work with for that weekend. Of course, you do risk sort of booking up that weekend at all, potentially, if you're not already booked up. But it's just something to think about. I do certainly want to screen my clients as they are screening me. Find out what ground the tent is going on. This is very, very important. Of course, grass is the easiest. If it is on grass, make sure the client mows that grass down. It's going to make your setup easier. It's going to be like less bugs jumping onto your tent top if you're out on an acreage. If it's on gravel, charge extra. If it's on asphalt, you can still stake through asphalt, but of course, you might have to repair the damages after, or discuss that with the client, get approval from the landlord, etc. Those are almost all videos in themselves. You can even do it on concrete. For smaller frame tents, you can use weights, make sure they're very, very heavy. Look at the manufacturer's guidelines for that. But most importantly, for all these ground setups, especially and exclusively, I suppose, if you're staking the tents to the ground, you want to get a utilities locate. Now, do not assume that just because you're out on an acreage, there's no lines or utility lines underneath the ground. There's no excuses for this. You really, really need to get a utilities locate. You might as well cancel the tent job if you have not done so. So be sure 100% to get a utilities locate for your safety, for the liability of your business. If you're able to, schedule your tent setup ahead of time. You do not want to be setting up the morning of the event, especially if it's a large tent. You want a good buffered period in case it's windy, in case you forget a part, in case you get a flat tire, in case a couple guys are sick for some reason from last night's Asian buffet, whatever the case may be. You definitely want to consider the schedule. You want to have a large timeline. Most contracts for like pole tents say we are going to set this tent up to 5 days ahead of time, and after up to 5 days afterwards. Now, some venues are not going to let you do that, so you want to consider whether you even want that job, because when it's a tight schedule, a tight time frame, setting up a tent can be very stressful. If it's a windy day, what are you going to do? So make sure, if at all possible, you have a little bit of breathing room and you're setting up your tent jobs, your larger tent jobs, let's say Wednesday, Thursday for Saturday events, and then taking them down Sunday or Monday or Tuesday. So you get a lot of breathing room there. It's not stressful. If you miss a part, it's not a problem. You can rush that part over and get it. Whatever the case may be, setting up the tents ahead of time is going to make your life much easier.
Tent walls, are you giving the client an option between window walls and plain walls? Are you charging the client for walls, or are they part of the tent package?
Now you want to consider perhaps heating, cooling, lighting, draping. These are all other options that can be incorporated into your tent package, into some add-ons that are available, but you want to consider these as well. Although interestingly enough, you don't always want to have too many options because that might lengthen or create issues with the booking process, and you really want to keep things as simple as possible typically.
Always be aware of the wind. Larger tent tops can act as a sail, so the best practice is to avoid setting up tents in high winds.
We may even adjust the setup date depending on the weather conditions. Speaking of weather, a lot of these tents don't have an official snow load. So be aware of snow if you're perhaps in a northerly environment. Larger tents are typically slightly more complicated. They require more gear and more labor to set up. So make sure you are aware of those requirements and what you need, and you'll have a successful tent setup. I really enjoy setting up larger tents. Maybe it's just being outside in the sun. If you're considering adding larger tents to your event rental company, I highly suggest it and wish you the best of luck. Goodbye.
Have a nice day.